The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Panama-based law firm Mossack Fonseca has had almost 3 terabytes of data made up of 11.5 million documents leaked. This is one of the biggest data leaks in history. This is bigger than Edward Snowden's leaks 3 years ago. This is bigger than the WikiLeaks diplomatic cable leaks of 2010. These were originally obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. This led to a year-long investigation by the ICIJ. It involved over 100 publications over nearly 80 countries. And this is absolutely huge. And it will be a while before we even know the full fallout and significance of these leaks. Financial records have been leaked. Passports have been leaked. Letters stretching back 40 years have been leaked. And information about the use of over 200,000 offshore entities across 200 countries. These are accounts that are not illegal, but are often used as tax havens and for money laundering have been leaked. Many reportedly found to be shell companies established to help the firm's legal clients through 500 different banks around the world. Why is this a huge deal? Well, 140 offshore accounts at minimum have been linked to current and former politicians worldwide. This includes 12 current and former heads of state, including Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, former Prime Minister of Iraq, Ayad Alawi, Saudi Arabian monarch King Salman named in the list, and of course the family members and associates of so many other world leaders, British Prime Minister David Cameron, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, South African President Jacob Zuma, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. This is huge, Lewis, and already we're starting to see the reaction. So far, nobody admitting to any wrongdoing whatsoever. Iceland's prime minister saying he will not step down, and the fallout here could be huge.
It really blew up in overnight, and it is going to take a long time to parse through all of this data, so much of it, and I hope we get some juicy bits out of it, right? And
every indication that there is more coming. We haven't yet even gotten the list of Americans involved in this, and that is potentially quite the list. The most high-profile person who has been implicated here, he's not named directly, but Vladimir Putin, Russian President Vladimir Putin, has his best friend and a whole bunch of other associates named by this investigation for allegedly helping to launder more than $2 billion. Would not come as any surprise to most people, but absolutely significant that it actually appears to be sort of closing in on Vladimir Putin here. Also, say it ain't so. Argentinian soccer player Leo Messi and his father implicated. That may be an error, Lewis. I reject that, although they are both under prosecution for tax evasion currently.
Oh, so the tax evasion stuff doesn't bother you too much, right? but would this be a deal breaker? Is he no longer going to be your favorite player if this happens?
Well, listen, I mean, we have to be able to separate people's legal actions from their incredible achievements on the soccer field, on the pitch, don't you think?
Well, you can. I guess it wouldn't bother me either.
And to be very clear, the difference between a bank executive or some random rich guy and heads of state and political figures being implicated in some combination of tax avoidance and tax evasion is really, really big. The Kremlin said that the documents are nothing concrete. Pakistan has denied wrongdoing. Australia, Austria, Brazil, France, and Sweden say, well, we're starting to look into this, but we're not admitting anything. And the most important thing is to remember the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax avoidance using legal mechanisms to the best of your ability to limit your tax liability, and tax evasion typically breaking laws. And we will have to see where a lot of these actions fall. But absolutely huge. Just wait for the U.S. names. The other shoe may drop here, Lewis, and it may be huge. A lot of economists, actual economists who know things, are very confused by Donald Trump's recent prediction that the United States is on the verge of a, quote, very massive recession. In an interview with the Washington Post published over the weekend, Donald Trump said that a combination of high unemployment, which he believes to be 20% bogus, and an overvalued stock market have set the stage for a big economic slump. He believes real unemployment is above 20%. This is a baseless talking point. That includes people who are retired. That includes junior and seniors in high school who are just going to school full time. It includes people choosing not to work. Only by including all of those individuals could you possibly get an unemployment rate even close to 20%. And a bunch of economists were asked about this, and they don't know what on earth Trump is talking about. Harm Bandholz, who's the chief U.S. economist at UniCredit Research in New York, said, "We're not heading for a recession, massive or minor, and the unemployment rate is not 20%. Other economists said, well, yeah, the stock market may be in a period of overvaluation, but we don't see any cataclysmic economic downturn originating in the United States. And the real big issue, Lewis, is if that were the case, electing Donald Trump is not going to avoid it, not even close. And that, I think, is whether or not you believe Trump on this, and he's been predicting huge economic downturns for a long time. And statistically speaking, at some point, there will be a downturn. And there has been one, of course, which we are only now recovering from. Donald Trump as president would not avoid a future downturn. And that, I think, is what we should be focusing on here.
This is really just typical campaign trail fear-mongering, but many people do believe that Donald Trump is the guy if there's economic hardship because of his businesses, because he touts himself as this business and money genius.
Sungwon Son, who's an economics professor at Cal State, said that there's about a 10% chance of an imminent recession at this point. And he said if it does happen, it would be because of what's happening overseas, especially in China and Europe. You'll know, of course, that Donald Trump has outsourced work to China. Somehow hiring him to be president would prevent that. Doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. And I will remind you that there was recently a study which actually placed Donald Trump being president as one of the greatest 10 economic world risks. So if economists are united on anything, it's that, number one, Trump has no clue what he's talking about. And number two, one of the biggest threats to the economy would be Donald Trump being the next president of the United States. We've got a very backward situation here, Lewis, in terms of the pot calling the kettle black, as it may be.
The economy would be the least of my worries with a Donald Trump presidency, right? I mean, I'd be more worried about a nuclear exchange of some sort.
After saying he wouldn't take nuking Europe off of the table.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Donald Trump's campaign has been so abortive, so misguided, so obviously a total joke that there's increasingly speculation that the entire thing is a goof or a publicity stunt or even an attempt to help Hillary Clinton win the 2016 election, as a number of our viewers have suggested over the last few weeks. Last week, I told you the story of Trump's former super PAC director. This is a pro-Trump super PAC that did not directly work for the Trump campaign. She described a meeting that she had at Trump Tower where the idea was never for Trump to win the Republican nomination, but rather to come in second, maybe with around 10 or 15% of the delegates, and to get really great publicity. And maybe surprisingly to some, the number of low information voters and extremist voters that Trump has been able to catalyze has put him in the lead for the Republican nomination, at least as of now in early April. Last week was really, really bad for Donald Trump. He suggested that the Geneva Conventions be dismissed. He said he doesn't want to rule out using nuclear bombs on Europe. He gave 3 different positions about abortion in a 2-hour period, one being that women who have illegal abortions should be punished. And then his campaign manager was arrested and charged with assault for his altercation with reporter Michelle Fields. And Trump's response was, at best, weird, and at worst, some form of victim blaming. So more and more journalists and political insiders now are really questioning whether Trump realizes that he's just way over his head and is sabotaging his own campaign. So let's take a look at a couple of quotes that came out over the last 48 hours or so. We have the quote from last week, first of all, from Stephanie Sigilski. This is that former communications director of the Make America Great Again super PAC. She said, I don't even think Trump thought he would go this far, and I don't even know that he wanted to, which is perhaps the scariest prospect of all. What was once his desire to rank second place to send a message to America it increases power as a businessman, has nightmarishly morphed into a charade that is poised to do irreparable damage to this country. Wow. Next quote about this self-sabotage from John Fund of the National Review. To all outward appearances, Trump seems to be engaged in a form of self-sabotaging behavior in which people both move toward a goal and then from deep within do things to defeat themselves. Next quote on this issue from Sherry Jacobus, a Republican strategist who says she met with Trump about being his communications director. I believe Trump senses he is in way over his head and doesn't really want the nomination. He wanted to help his brand and have fun, but not to be savaged by the Clintons if he's the candidate. He wouldn't mind falling short of a delegate majority, losing the nomination, and then playing angry celebrity victim in the coming years. I doubt Trump is actively trying to self-sabotage, but there is no doubt, Lewis, that he is feeling the pressure now that it's down to 3 and he doesn't know anything. Build the wall, make America great again works pretty well when there's 17 candidates, many of whom don't even have a couple of good talking points. It works okay when there's 10 Republican candidates. It starts to falter a little bit when there's 5 or 6. And when there's 3 Republican candidates, not knowing anything about anything really starts to become a liability.
And you are the candidate that gets all the airtime, all the interviews, and everyone wants to have you on camera because it's good for ratings and because they're waiting for the next time you slip up inevitably and say something outrageous. Makes sense.
So yeah, it has always felt like this was about Trump's brand, but just imagine if he became president sort of accidentally because of how many clueless voters there are in the United States who don't see that this would be a laughingstock. It would be a bigger laughingstock than George W. Bush. And that's the name my mind goes back to. If George W. Bush can get himself elected or get himself close enough that Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris, in conjunction with the Supreme Court, can put him in the White House, then it's not off the table that Donald Trump could also win. Send me your thoughts on this. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Louis Motamedi.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is James Kelty. James, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. As you know, this is not traditional media. We aren't funded by huge media conglomerates. We're not funded by big corporations that send us millions of dollars a year. We're funded mostly by viewers like James Kelty, who signed up at davidpakman.com/membership. And it's not just a feel-good thing, although it'll feel great. Lewis knows he's got 2 million memberships. You also get a lot of really great member benefits. We do an entire extra show called The Bonus Show just for our paid subscribers. You get a commercial-free audio and video feed of the show and so much great stuff. So sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And a big thank you to James Kelty, who is today's new member of the day. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can also support the work that we do by first going to davidpakman.com/Amazon. A ton of Star Wars The Force Awakens streams and paraphernalia purchased over the last few days through our Amazon link. Lewis, I've seen the advertisements all over TV, now available, Star Wars The Force Awakens. You were sort of lukewarm about The Force Awakens after you saw it months ago. Has your view on this film changed since seeing it?
No, I still don't think it's a good film, and I'm really hoping the next two are just a bit less rushed.
I really think that it was a very entertaining one. I think it was much better than episodes 1, 2, and 3, which were the 4th, 5th, and 6th movies made in terms of real-world chronology, although they were prequels to the first 3 episodes, 4, 5, and 6, which were made 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Wow, what a clear explanation. No, but yeah, I think that it was much better than episodes 1, 2, and 3, although I do think that it was basically a movie and a half that they squeezed into one movie. But I look forward to episodes 8 and 9.
I'm looking forward to it. Cautiously optimistic. Yeah.
Also, a lot of people buying accessories for the Samsung S7 and S7 Edge. My phone is almost dead. The battery life has basically become almost nil. It freezes all the time. I have a crazy black line on my screen, but I'm trying to wait because I can't figure out whether I should get the S7 or the S7 Edge. If people have a strong feeling on this, let me know. I went and looked at both of them. They both seem like great phones. Maybe it doesn't matter, Lewis. Maybe this is a first world problem and I'll be fine with either.
You will be fine with either. I guarantee it.
DavidPakman.com/Amazon. Anytime you shop on Amazon, go to DavidPakman.com/Amazon, and your shopping will support the work that we do. Here's something interesting and exciting. Come see a panel that I will be moderating with three great friends of the show. Left Forum is a huge annual conference. It is a progressive and left-leaning conference. It is next month at John Jay College in Manhattan, New York City, in the Empire State, Lewis, of New York State, May 20th to 22nd. It's a 3-day event. I will be speaking. I will be moderating a panel on Friday, May 20th in the late afternoon. It will be a panel about progressive media, about independent media, about the role of independent media in the 2016 election. My three panelists will be three friends. Sam Cedar, host of The Majority Report, will be on the panel. Nomiki Konst will be on the panel. She is someone I've known for many years now. She really has dug in to right-wing media and regularly makes appearances as the lone liberal voice on Fox News and on all sorts of shows. She will be on the panel. And friend of the show here in Boston, Massachusetts, Ben Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon program, will be on the panel. Lewis, it is going to be explosive. I hope that there are no hecklers at this panel, because we know that it is a panel ripe for heckling. But you can find out more at leftforum.org, and I would love to see you there. I think it's going to be fantastic and tremendous.
It will be fantastic, tremendous, stupendous, unbelievable. I'm trying to come up with more words to describe this, but it's just so incredible.
You're almost at a loss for words.
I'm almost rendered speechless by the awesomeness of this panel.
The time has not been set 100%, but I'm told it will be sometime around 5 p.m. Yeah, right, Lewis? Yeah. I think Lewis is cracking himself up over there.
A little bit. I'm allowed.
It'll be around 5 p.m. Friday, May 20th, again in New York City. Go to leftforum.org to sign up, and it'll be a magical evening, that's for sure. A visibly disoriented Sarah Palin gave a bizarre speech at a Donald Trump rally that can only be attributed to drug usage or maybe a series of small strokes, which is nothing to joke about. I mean, this is visually confusing is what happened here. And also Sarah Palin just looking different. If you told me this was a Sarah Palin impersonator, I would sort of wonder whether that was true, because I can't explain what happened here. I can't explain what she's talking about. I'll play it for you. Maybe a medical expert can make sense out of what's happening here.
Legal immigrants, welcoming them in, even inducing and seducing them with gift baskets. Come on over the border and here's a gift basket of teddy bears and soccer balls. Our kids and our grandkids, they'll never know then what it is to be rewarded for that entrepreneurial spirit that God creates within us in order to work and to produce and to strive and to thrive and to really be alive. Wisconsin, Reagan saved the hog. Here, your Harley Davidson, it was Reagan who saved that. In the establishment, maybe they're going to start a new hashtag movement, hashtag Never Reagan. They don't like that.
Lewis, are you familiar with the term brown acid?
I am not. I am noticing that she is disheveled, that she seems to be in a strange physical state, a strange mental state. That's probably always the case with her. I don't know what to make of it, really.
This woman was almost a heartbeat away from being president of the United States. John McCain, when he is presented with this, if he can even bear to watch it without becoming physically ill, he must be having very strong emotions about the fact that he is his campaign, but his name is the John McCain campaign, right? It's his name. He is responsible for Sarah Palin to a great degree. Yeah, I'm sure it was advisors who said, here's an idea. Let's get the governor of Alaska to be your running mate. To some extent, it's McCain who's responsible for Sarah Palin.
Well, I'm sure he has plenty of regrets, but he, no doubt, is pointing the finger at someone else. He's not pointing the finger. He's pointing the finger at the people that told him this would be a good idea. But does it all fall on McCain? I suppose he did create a monster here.
This is really funny. They were talking about this on Morning Joe, and there's a still image of Mika Brzezinski after she watched this. And the image, the look on her face for people who are watching with us, it is representative of what everybody with a brain is thinking about Sarah Palin's incoherent ramblings. And actually, the look on Joe Scarborough's face says a lot too. But how do you describe, Lewis, that look on Mika Brzezinski's face after witnessing this Sarah Palin video?
It's one of confusion and one of disgust, maybe a little bit of that. Joe looks like he's wincing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wincing or grimacing? I don't know which it is.
One of the two.
Are the incoherent ramblings of Sarah Palin the most unusual and unique political speak of the last 10 years, would you say?
On the national, large-scale level,
yeah,
no doubt. You could find stuff, I'm sure you could find some gems coming out of small local elections, and who knows what's happening at the micro level. But yes, David, she is the craziest thing you'll hear on mainstream media.
I could watch her speeches, though. I mean, I could sit there. There's something zen about watching these Palin speeches that I can't quite describe. But it's, you know how when you watch Bob Ross videos of Bob Ross, the painter who did this show on PBS where he would paint happy little trees and put, you know, a little cloud here and blah, 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 blah. There's some factor of it, something about it that I can't quite identify, where I turn it on and I say, yeah, I could watch this for a while. And it's the same thing when Sarah Palin starts speaking to me.
Maybe she is painting in a way. She's painting with words. And the thing is, it's a bit more avant-garde and abstract than a Bob Ross painting.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break here. After the break, we will get the latest from Johann Hari about what could be groundbreaking discussions around the war on drugs at the upcoming United Nations Special General Assembly. We'll speak to Johann Hari next. Make sure to give us a like on Facebook, almost at 50,000 likes, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined again by Johann Hari, who is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs. Johann, last time you were on, we talked sort of about the broader failures of the war on drugs as we know it, as a sort of criminal justice, from the criminal justice perspective. And we talked about incarceration, we talked about outcomes, etc. When the United Nations General Assembly has met in the past and the issue of drugs has come up, typically the perspective has been, and you'll explain it more eloquently than I'm able to, thinking of it as a criminal justice and law enforcement issue, and has sort of furthered this failed war on drugs, has it not?
Yeah, we're about to come up to this kind of mind-blowingly important moment, I think. Once every 10 years, all the countries in the world, like I say, meet at the UN. It's called the UN Special Assembly. And they basically, up to now, when they meet to discuss drugs, they basically say we're going to wage relentless war. We're not going to stop until we've got a drug-free world. And this time, it's about to happen in New York in a couple of weeks. And this time, for the first time ever, loads of countries are going to turn up and say, we're not doing this anymore. It doesn't work. It's been a catastrophe for us. It's been a catastrophe for everyone. There is a better way and we've got to choose it. So one of the things that's been really interesting for me is over the last few months, speaking to representatives of the countries that are going to speak out. And their stories, I think, are really moving and inspiring.
And talk a little bit about there's this global drug treaty that was written in 1961, which basically puts on paper that it's going to be a war on the drug users and addicts and sellers as a sort of law enforcement operation, and that's where some of these possible declarations could really set a new path forward, couldn't they?
I think so. So I've spoken to representatives of 3 countries who are opposing the drug war for quite different reasons, but they really fit with the reasons why people are rebelling against the drug war within the US itself. So, for example, excuse me, Mark Golding is the Justice Minister for Jamaica. And he had a real turning point a few years ago when he had to phone a woman and tell her that her son had been arrested for smoking a spliff in the street and beaten to death in prison. And for him, it was a moment when he just thought, why are we doing this? You know, he doesn't think cannabis is any more harmful than alcohol. He then spoke out. He argued for the decriminalization of cannabis within Jamaica, which has succeeded. He sees real parallels with the Black Lives Matter movement. Wherever you ban drugs, because the drug laws are so widely broken, they're broken by half the population of the United States, for example, you simply cannot enforce them against everyone. Who do they end up being enforced against? It's the most unpopular group within any society, the group with the least economical, political power to fight back. Now, in the United States, obviously we know about structural racism. A lot of that has been focused on African Americans. In Jamaica, it's obviously almost everyone is black, but it's been focused against poor and disenfranchised young men. So here's one example. A completely different country, more than 5,000 miles away, the Czech Republic. Their minister for drugs is an extraordinary man called Jindřich Voboril, and he's himself a former addict. He basically grew up as a street kid. He had a quite violent alcoholic father, and he started kind of heavily consuming any substance he could get hold of. A lot of his friends died. The only thing that really pulled him out of it is he discovered the punk underground and the resistance to the communist dictatorship. And when communism fell, he set up the first drug rehab center in the Czech Republic, but he realized that he was blocked from doing things that actually, a lot of the things that actually save addicts' lives by the global drug war, by these treaties that prevent you from doing really sensible things like prescribe heroin. And Voboril will be saying at the UN Assembly, you know, his big thing will be to talk about how the drug war kills addicts. Switzerland has legalized heroin. I went to see it. In the more than 10 years since that happened, do you know how many people have died of heroin overdoses on legal heroin? Nobody. Portugal decriminalized all drugs. The result was that injecting drug use fell by 50%, massive fall in overdose deaths, massive fall in deaths of all kinds among addicts. So Voboril will be talking about the need to make sure that we stop policies that kill addicts and turn to the policies that save their lives. And just the last one, and I think actually of all the moral issues, I think the other two are hugely important. I think this is the biggest. Mauricio Rodriguez, who I met up with in Cartagena in Colombia, who's advising President Santos on this, is advising the president, and the president will be saying, you know, the violence caused by prohibiting drugs is a catastrophe. More people have died in the drug war violence, by some estimates, in Mexico and in Colombia than have died in the war in Syria, to give you some example. And you compare how much we rightly talk about Syria to how little we talk about this violence that we cause. When you ban drugs, they don't go away. They're transferred to armed criminal gangs. Those armed criminal gangs go to war to control that trade. I mean, I tell that story in my book through the story of a hitman for the deadliest Mexican drug cartel who I got to know. But that violence ends when drug prohibition ends. And if you want to know why, ask yourself, where are the violent alcohol dealers today? Does the head of Heineken go and shoot the head of Smirnoff in the face? No, that's exactly what happened under alcohol prohibition. So there's a real mixture of reasons why people are going to be speaking out, but they'll come together to kind of argue that we've got to pursue much better policies.
And Johann, will there be, do you believe that what has taken place in the United States in, for example, Colorado, which is the state where we now have the biggest amount of data about their legalization process, will any of that, do you imagine, be discussed or entered into the discussion?
All 3 of them brought it up to me. It's hard to underestimate the degree to which the significance of what the people of Columbia and Washington State and Oregon have done is really reverberating.
Colorado, not Columbia, I think you mean, right? Colorado, not Columbia.
Oh, sorry, I meant to say Colorado, Washington, and Oregon,
yeah,
and Alaska. So the states that have voted to move on this. And it's worth noting that that wasn't done by politicians, right? In fact, politicians resisted it in most of those states. It was done by ordinary citizens who banded together and demanded an alternative. The crucial significance of that, and it really goes to what the US position will be at the UN, is up to now, the US has been the country that's been imposing this war on the world through a mixture of kind of threats, bribes, violence. That's how it's always been imposed upon the world, right from the start of drug prohibition 100 years ago. And because of the rebellion by ordinary Americans in the states that you mentioned, the US is entering the UN in a really difficult position if you want to maintain the drug war, right? They're turning up and they're banging their fist on the table and saying, you've got to all go to war against drugs. But at the heart of the country that's been imposing this on the world, the drug war has begun to fall apart. They actually have licensed, legal, regulated sale of marijuana. It's, of course, been very successful. You know, support for cannabis legalization has gone up since people have seen it in practice. And that really struck me everywhere I went for my book. You know, I went to the places where you've had the most vicious and terrible aspects of the drug war. I went to, you know, the killing fields in northern Mexico. I went out with a group of women who were made to go out on chain gangs in Arizona, wearing T-shirts saying I was a drug addict and humiliated in public. And I went to the places where they've had the most compassionate policies, Portugal, Switzerland, where they've massively turned addicts' lives around and massively reduced, in the case of Switzerland, massively reduced the violence caused by prohibition. You know, the evidence that we have now, this is not a theoretical debate, and this is one of the things, partly because of Colorado and the other countries, that people will be able to explain at the UN. The last time this was debated 10 years ago, the alternatives to the drug war were a theory. We could point to the things that happened 100 years ago. This time we've got evidence. You know, and one of the most powerful things that can be explained is, okay, the US wants to say, let's carry on with the drug war, not representing its people, by the way, but the US government want to say that. Let's look at the evidence. The United States has spent $1 trillion, 100 years. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people. And at the end of all that, they can't even keep drugs out of their prisons, which gives you some sense of how well this policy works. Whereas we can look at the places that have chosen the alternatives and see the results there, and they're pretty stunning.
In the limited time we have left, I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, many in the U.S. have an understanding that if we were to totally rethink the way we are dealing with drug use in the United States, you're going to reduce incarceration in prisons. You're obviously going to provide, through legalization, as we're seeing in Colorado, tax revenues for the government, which then can be used to improve other areas of people's lives. But can you give us just a few of the other ways in which stopping this failed drug war would benefit the United States or any country, really?
Well, one of the things that's very close to my heart is what we do to addicts. One of my earliest memories is trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And to me, maybe it's just because of my personal experience, but what happened in Portugal with addicts, I think, is really important. They had a huge drug problem. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin by the year 2000. And what they did is they decided to set up a scientific panel to really figure out what would solve this problem. And the panel came back and said, decriminalize all drugs, from cannabis to crack. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we currently spend on making addicts' lives worse, on screwing their lives up, on giving them criminal records, on shaming them and stigmatizing them, and spend it instead on programs to turn their lives around. And it's interesting, it's not really what we think of as drug treatment in the US and Britain. So they did some rehab and some psychological support, and that does have some value. But the biggest thing was a huge program of job creation. They had a huge program of microloans, so addicts could set up small businesses that they ran themselves. Huge program of subsidized jobs. The message, the goal was to say to every addict in Portugal, we love you, we value you, we're on your side, we want you back. And the results have been really incredible. As I say, 50% fall in injecting drug use, massive fall in addiction. One of the most, you know, I met so many people from my book, but one of the ones that most moved me was I interviewed the man who led the opposition to the campaign opposing the decriminalization at the time in Portugal, a man called João Figueira. He was the top drug cop in Portugal, and he said at the time, you know, this is going to be a catastrophe. You know, we're going to have addicts everywhere. We're going to have a huge increase in drug use. And when I went to see him, he said, everything I said would happen didn't happen. And everything the other side said would happen did. And he talked about how he felt really ashamed that he'd spent so many years arresting and harassing drug users. And unfortunately, João Figueira died last year. But I really hope that that spirit of, you know, people looking at this and looking at the evidence and opening their hearts and really seeing the stories and the humanity of the people we've been destroying will infuse the UN meeting. And at least one thing that will come out of the UN meeting is no one will ever be able to say again, The world is united in a crusade to rid the world of drugs. Actually, Jindřich Voboril, the Czech drug minister, said to me, when he hears that phrase, a drug-free world, the only thing he can compare it to is like the kind of Stalinist slogans that he grew up with in Czechoslovakia as it was then, these kind of ridiculous utopian fantasies. It's like saying we'll have a world without greed or something. It's ludicrous. It's worth thinking about how removed from reality the drug war is, that you can actually have a slogan that the goal is to have a drug-free world, and people don't just laugh out loud. There has never been a drug-free world. There's never been a society where human beings didn't seek out intoxicants. It's a basic human impulse. For most people, it causes them no harm. For the people who are in a lot of pain already, it can lead to addiction, in which case shame and stigma make them worse. Love and compassion help them turn their lives around. And I think that message is really starting to percolate across the world now.
The book, of course, is Chasing the Stream, the first and last days of the war on drugs. We've been speaking with the book's author, Johann Hari. Johann, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants any more information, then go to www.chasingthescream.com. Thank you so much, David. You always do really great work on the subject, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
At a Hillary Clinton rally at SUNY Purchase, the presidential candidate sort of lost her patience with a Greenpeace activist who thanked her for her commitment to climate change, but then asked whether she'll reject fossil fuel money going forward. And Hillary Clinton didn't like it. She said she was sick and tired of talking points and lies coming from the Bernie Sanders campaign. Let's take a look at the video from SUNY Purchase.
Thank you for tackling climate change. Will you act on your words and reject fossil fuel money in the future in your campaign?
I do not. I have money from people who work for fossil fuel companies. I am so sick. I am so sick of the Sanders campaign lying about me. I'm sick of it.
I agree with you with Sanders on the climate.
I think the worst part is how quickly Hillary Clinton assumes the person asking her the question is somehow affiliated with her opponent, Bernie Sanders, or got the idea to talk about fossil fuel donations from the Bernie Sanders campaign, as opposed to just being concerned about this issue. And this is where I get concerned with the Democratic primary. The Republican primary, they are devouring each other. They are all incompetent candidates. They are all extremist candidates. It's nuts what's going on over there. But for the most part, the discussion on the Democratic side has been far more substantive and about issues. But when anyone who questions the corrosive effect of money in politics with respect to Hillary Clinton is sort of written off or disqualified as just buying into Bernie Sanders' lies, this is where I think the Democratic primary can go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, this is, I don't know. She maybe doesn't believe that this is coming from the Bernie Sanders campaign. I mean, do they actively have a campaign out there to? I know that they are discussing overall Hillary's campaign contributions.
Yeah,
but the Bernie Sanders campaign are not the only people spreading this message. They're not the only people who are worried about it. And it's true that this money is coming into her.
Not to mention that while Hillary Clinton is correct that a lot of that money is from individual donors who happen to work for those companies, Bernie Sanders also has received some money from those individuals. Only about 17, 18% of the money Hillary Clinton has received. But yes, individuals can donate money. The real issue is around PACs.
Right.
The most important question is, are the allegations true? And indeed, there are few fossil fuel interests that have pumped reportedly over $3 million into the largest super PAC supporting Hillary Clinton's candidacy for the White House. Apparently, 1 out of every $15 given to Priorities USA Action, which took in $50 million in contributions in the last year, did come from donors linked to oil and natural gas interests, according to data compiled by Greenpeace. That's via a super PAC, and these are real questions. And when I watched this video, as I've mentioned, I supported Bernie Sanders here in the Massachusetts Democratic primary. If Hillary Clinton is ultimately the nominee, I will support Hillary Clinton, and I think she is by far the best option when compared to the Republican nominees, although as someone who is more progressive than Hillary, I would prefer the candidate to be Bernie Sanders. I am not confused in any way about saying, oh, well, maybe I'll vote third party and risk in some way turning this election over to someone like Trump or whatever. Absolutely not. That is not where I am. We have to be able to talk about these things without just saying, oh, it's a smear from my opponent.
Yes, the Sanders campaign has done a pretty good job of telling the truth and not saying anything slanderous or untrue.
Yeah.
But it's a strategy, and she has a campaign to win.
And with every candidate, you are going to find some questions around this. I mean, she could go and say, hey, you know, Bernie has received, I think it's like $50,000 from oil and gas industry employees. And that's a fair question. And then we can say with any particular candidate, here's the amount you received, either via super PAC or via individual donors or whatever. Here's your platform. Here are past actions you've taken with regard to this issue, and we can make an assessment of where we think they will actually be as legislators or as presidents. Hillary's platform on energy is very pro-renewable, but we know money does influence politicians. Hillary Clinton has said she does want to regulate fracking, but she has accepted a lot of fracking-related money, et cetera, et cetera. She's received money for giving speeches, for example, at the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, which is a big investor in Keystone XL and TransCanada. We can look at all of this. These are all absolutely legitimate elements to look at when figuring out how a candidate is likely to be as president. And I think writing it off as lies from Bernie is absolutely the wrong way to go. Hey, here is some really, really disturbing video, which we're going to play in a second. This is video of an NYPD officer killing a dog whose tail was pretty obviously wagging in front of an apartment. The video has now gone viral. The dog belonged to Yvonne Rosado, who was dancing with her dog in her apartment. She heard something outside, opened the door, and before you play the video, Lewis, I want to restate, the video is disturbing. The video includes the dog being shot. If you don't want to see that, I would skip forward about 45 or 50 seconds. And as you will see here, Lewis, the dog comes out. It appears to be wagging its tail, and you will see that the police officer almost immediately shoots the dog, and the dog dies. And it is difficult to watch. It is horrible. When you watch this, Lewis, I mean, what do you think? Is this a dog that posed a danger? The officer said that he believed he feared for his life at the time.
Then you have an officer that's a coward, which is common. Actually, there are a lot of very cowardly police officers. The thing is that what I see videos like this every day. Yeah. Every day. I'm not exaggerating. And we have a country full of police officers who, despite knowing that they are accepting a job that puts themselves in harm's way, will do anything to avoid getting even a scratch on them. And that's why they have such itchy trigger fingers, because they are
I also
terrified.
think there's a difference in terms of whether was this an aggressive dog that was imminently putting Officer Ruben Cuesta's life in danger. And
well, the other officer didn't seem to think so.
The other officer did not seem to think so. The video is incredibly disturbing, and all sorts of animal behaviorists have looked. And they've said, well, the dog seemed to be wagging its tail, but it did go very quickly towards Officer Cuesta, so maybe he was scared. But at the same time, would a dog that is violent be wagging its tail in this way and sort of looking around and looking bouncy and friendly and whatever? The outrage over this video is incredible, and New York Police Department has not really given an explanation as to what happened. They did leave the dog's owner, Yvonne Rosado, with a $265 cremation bill later in the video, and we won't play this part. Yvonne Rosado, after the dog had completely died, after losing the struggle to stay alive, she actually attacked the officer here and ended up getting herself tackled by NYPD. I mean, just horrible, disturbing video, a disturbing story. And shockingly, back in 2010, this all happened. Police came to the wrong address and ended up shooting her dog dead. In 2010, according to the New York Daily News, police also went to the wrong address and killed Yvonne Rosado's cat, which had no legs. I mean, you can't write this stuff.
It's, yes, it's baffling. I don't know what to add. We just have we have many corrupt police officers, but we also have many police officers that are just cowards and they're afraid all the time. And because they have guns, the guns come out very quickly.
Do you think this is cowardice, or do you think it's lack of judgment?
No, this is cowardice, because this doesn't even seem like a situation where there was enough time for judgment. This is an instinctual reaction, and that is one of fear, and this is the result.
Wow. All right. Send me your thoughts. Do you agree with Lewis? Was this lack of judgment? Was this an act of cowardice? Was this just a bad cop? Was it an inexperienced cop? What do you think happened here? Or do you believe the police officer was justified in shooting this dog dead? I'd be interested to hear from you if that's what you think. We have a voicemail number. The number is 2192-DAVID-P. Last week we talked about, I mentioned how it's a pet peeve of mine when somebody says that you have a nice house, for example, or a nice car, or your significant other is attractive, and that some people say thank you as if they made the car or built the house or whatever. And here's a kind of funny voicemail we received in response to that.
Hey, you guys are talking about complimenting people on stuff that, like, hey, you got a nice car, say thanks, right? But what if someone came up to Lewis and was like, Lewis, your wife's really hot. But what if Lewis had genetically engineered and designed his wife?
Yeah.
Like, should he say thank you? Or should he say, yeah, of course she is. What do you think?
Well, this is a good question, which is, in the world of genetic enhancement or whatever, I guess if Lewis had designed his wife, then there might be something to, Lewis, your wife is very attractive. Oh, thank you. Of course, it's hard to imagine a situation where Lewis would Lewis is already in his 30s, unless you anticipate Lewis being with someone who's more than 30 years younger than he is. I don't know of a situation where Lewis would genetically design his wife.
Accelerated growth. That might be an option in the future. There's a lot of sci-fi stuff that has that, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, it's an interesting question.
I would just like to add that many people buy wives too. That's the thing.
Yes, but if you buy a wife, what are you being thanked for, really? Or what are you being?
Right.
I'm sorry. What are you being complimented on?
In that way, well, it's somewhere in between the car that you bought, but this is also your wife. It's a little bit different than your car. And
yeah.
You can buy a beautiful wife. How is it? Maybe that's kind of similar to genetically creating a beautiful wife, because you're paying for that.
I think this is pretty odd territory, and I think we're just going to talk about what's on the bonus show. We will talk about Google's April Fool's prank, which does not last very long. We will talk about Liberia outsourcing their entire education system, and we will talk about a Rhode Island tourism video that shows Iceland. Who was confused? Lewis has been to Iceland. What did he think of the video? DavidPakman.com/membership is the only way to sign up for membership and get instant access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.